The moment you opened your eyes today, before the noise of the world rushed in and before your worries began listing themselves one by one, there was a quiet space that belonged only to you and to God. And in that space lies a power that most people overlook because they wake up already chasing outcomes instead of anchoring themselves in purpose. Yet the truth is that how you start your day shapes how you carry your mind, your spirit, and your courage through every challenge you meet. And beginning with faith is not about ritual or habit alone, but about alignment, about reminding yourself that you are not navigating uncertainty alone, and that your strength is not limited to your own calculations. Because when you center your morning in reflection, gratitude, and intention, you cultivate clarity that no external chaos can easily disturb. And it is this clarity that allows a person to face opportunity and rejection with equal steadiness, to see failure not as collapse but as information, to treat progress not as entitlement but as responsibility. And many of the world's most resilient thinkers have quietly practiced this internal discipline, whether or not they described it in spiritual language, because the discipline of grounding oneself before action is timeless. And if you consider the stories of people who rose from obscurity into global influence, you often find that their real transformation did not begin with resources or connections, but with perspective, with a shift in how they greeted each morning. And that is why the simple act of starting your day with God is less about external religion and more about internal positioning, about choosing humility before ambition and meaning before metrics, about stepping into your hours with the calm understanding that setbacks are temporary, but character is cumulative. And this approach changes the rhythm of your decisions. It makes you less reactive and more intentional, less fearful and more curious. And it encourages a mindset that is surprisingly similar to what philosophical entrepreneurs often express when they talk about resilience and vision, because wisdom is not confined to one domain. And there is a lesson echoed across disciplines that preparation of the mind precedes mastery of the environment, which is why reflecting on your purpose at sunrise can quietly reshape the way you interpret risk. Because when you trust that your journey has direction beyond what you immediately see, you become capable of stepping forward even when results are uncertain. And uncertainty is where growth lives, even though it rarely feels comfortable. And it is here that faith functions, not as escape but as reinforcement, reminding you that doubt does not disqualify you, and that patience is not stagnation but gestation. And while you may not always see the outcome of today's effort, the alignment you create this morning carries forward, influencing conversations, shaping choices, and strengthening persistence long after the sunrise fades. And that is why adopting a deliberate beginning is not naive optimism, but strategic discipline, because it trains your focus to notice possibility where others only see limitation, to identify lessons where others label defeat, and to maintain steadiness when recognition or validation takes longer than expected. And there is an important humility in this approach. The humility of acknowledging that you do not control every variable, yet still accepting responsibility for your preparation. Because preparation is the language of faith translated into action, and action fueled by reflection becomes sustainable rather than frantic. And sustainable effort is what builds meaningful progress, something often echoed by those who navigated difficult early years. For achieving recognition, including figures like Jack Ma, whose persistence through rejection illustrates how belief and endurance can coexist. Yet what matters here is not imitation of any individual story, but recognition that conviction and patience are universal tools. And beginning your day with God cultivates those tools by anchoring your identity in something deeper than immediate results. So when challenges arise, you do not interpret them as personal diminishment, but as situational tests. And this interpretation protects your motivation because it shifts your narrative from victimhood to stewardship, encouraging you to steward your time, your attention, and your mindset with intention. And intention is powerful because it turns ordinary hours into purposeful investment. And purposeful investment accumulates quietly, often invisibly, until one day you realize that your consistency has rewritten your capacity. And this realization does not arrive dramatically, but gradually, showing itself in calm responses where panic once lived, in measured decisions where impulse once dominated, and in gratitude where entitlement once lingered. And the beautiful paradox is that the more you align your morning with reflection and faith, the less you chase validation because you are already anchored in meaning. And meaning gives courage, courage fuels perseverance, and perseverance shapes legacy, which is why the invitation today is simple yet profound: to pause before rushing forward, to acknowledge the gift of another beginning, to set your intention not merely to accomplish, but to grow, to recognize that greatness is not born in noise, but cultivated in stillness, and to understand that every sunrise offers a quiet partnership between your effort and divine guidance. A partnership that does not promise ease, but does promise depth. And depth is what allows your success, whatever form it takes, to remain grounded rather than hollow. So as this day unfolds and responsibilities begin calling your name, carry with you the awareness that starting with God is not about withdrawing from ambition but refining it, not about ignoring goals but illuminating them, not about escaping struggle but transforming your relationship with it. And this transformation begins now, in this moment, with the conscious decision to step into your day awake not only in body but in spirit, steady not only in confidence but in humility, and ready not only to pursue opportunity but to grow through whatever unfolds, trusting that beginnings rooted in faith have a way of sustaining you far beyond the first hour, guiding your focus, strengthening your resilience, and reminding you that every meaningful journey is shaped first by how you choose to begin. There comes a point after the calm intention of morning when reality begins to test everything you believed just hours earlier. When emails arrive carrying pressure, when plans meet resistance, and when confidence trembles under the weight of unpredictability. And it is in this stretch of the day that many people quietly abandon the grounding they created at sunrise. Yet this is precisely where your discipline must deepen, because the difference between inspiration and transformation is endurance. And endurance is not loud or glamorous, but subtle and persistent, demanding that you remember why you anchored yourself in faith before the rush began. Because when circumstances tighten and outcomes grow uncertain, your mind will naturally search for stability. And if you have not built that stability inwardly, you will attempt to grasp it outwardly through validation, comparison, or fear-driven urgency, and those reactions cloud judgment, distorting perception until obstacles appear larger than they are, and possibilities appear smaller than they truly remain. And this is why the philosophy of maintaining alignment throughout the day matters, because alignment becomes your quiet compass, reminding you that setbacks are rarely final, and that uncertainty is often preparation disguised as interruption. And this perspective reshapes the emotional texture of challenge, turning frustration into curiosity and hesitation into exploration, allowing you to approach problems not as walls but as invitations to think differently. And thinking differently is what separates those who stagnate from those who evolve. Because evolution requires willingness to question familiar assumptions, to accept that progress is not linear, and to endure moments where clarity disappears entirely. And these moments can be unsettling, because they ask you to continue walking when the path ahead seems dim. History repeatedly shows that resilience is born in such obscurity, where belief sustains movement until understanding eventually catches up. And it is here that starting your day with God proves to be more than symbolic comfort, revealing itself as a structural strength that supports you when logic alone offers no reassurance. Because faith does not eliminate ambiguity, but reframes it, reminding you that temporary confusion does not equal permanent failure, and that purpose can persist even when outcomes are hidden. And this reassurance allows patience to remain active rather than passive, encouraging deliberate action even without immediate reward. And the discipline of deliberate action often mirrors the lessons expressed by visionary thinkers who emphasize persistence over instant validation, because they understand that innovation and achievement frequently pass through stretches of invisibility before recognition appears. And within those stretches, you must learn to hold steady, resisting the urge to define yourself by short-term results, and perhaps you begin noticing something unexpected, a tension building quietly between what you planned and what is unfolding, a sense that despite your preparation, something still feels unresolved. And this tension introduces suspense into your journey because it confronts you with a fundamental question about trust, asking whether your confidence depends on predictable success or whether it can survive unpredictable delay. And the answer cannot be spoken casually, but must be demonstrated through conduct, through your willingness to continue refining your effort even while outcomes remain uncertain. Because suspense is not merely narrative drama, but experiential reality, unfolding whenever ambition meets limitation and vision meets resistance. And during such times, you might recall how individuals who endured repeated rejection before eventual triumph often describe their darkest phases as necessary recalibration rather than collapse. And one frequently cited example is Jack Ma, whose early struggles remind observers that rejection can coexist with persistence without defining its conclusion. Yet the deeper lesson here lies not in comparison, but in introspection. Because your own path contains its own unknown turning points. And right now you may be standing closer to one than you realize, sensing neither confirmation nor closure, only the quiet demand to continue. And continuation requires courage that does not originate in external applause, but in internal conviction. Conviction that was seeded earlier when you aligned your spirit before the day began. And as this realization settles, you may feel both empowered and unsettled. Empowered because you recognize that perseverance remains within your control. Unsettled because you cannot foresee where perseverance will lead. And this duality intensifies suspense, urging you to confront vulnerability honestly, acknowledging that growth demands exposure to possibility without guarantee. And yet there is also beauty in that exposure, because it invites humility. And humility keeps ambition grounded enough to learn, enough to adapt, enough to transform setbacks into insight rather than identity. And through this process, you gradually perceive that your day is not simply a sequence of tasks, but a living narrative of refinement, where every difficulty carries instruction, and every delay carries perspective. And perspective widens your understanding of success until you see it not merely as arrival, but as continuous shaping of character. And character fortified by reflection and faith proves resilient even when resolution remains distant, enabling you to move forward with composure instead of desperation. And as hours pass, you might notice subtle shifts within yourself, a calmer response to frustration, a deeper focus on purpose, and a growing recognition that suspense itself is part of meaningful progress, not an obstacle to be escaped, but a phase to be navigated. And in navigating it, you reaffirm the commitment you made at dawn, the commitment to align effort with belief, to treat uncertainty as temporary terrain rather than permanent definition, and to remain attentive to lessons unfolding quietly beneath visible outcomes. And by sustaining this awareness, you carry forward the strength that began in stillness, transforming midday challenges into catalysts for growth, reinforcing the understanding that true motivation is not fueled solely by clarity, but also by perseverance through ambiguity, and that perseverance rooted in faith and reflection ultimately shapes a mindset capable of embracing both achievement and mystery with equal steadiness as the day continues unfolding beyond what you can yet see. As the day begins to close, and you look back on the hours that once stretched ahead of you with uncertainty, you start to recognize that the journey you traveled was not measured only by tasks completed or goals advanced, but by the steadiness you cultivated and the awareness you carried through moments of doubt. And this realization invites reflection deeper than routine evaluation, because reflection asks not only what you accomplished, but who you became while pursuing it. And growth often reveals itself quietly in the patience you exercised when frustration rose, in the clarity you maintained when distractions called, and in the humility you preserved when progress tempted pride. And these qualities are not accidental, but cultivated through the discipline of beginning your day grounded in purpose and faith, reminding you that every sunrise plants seeds whose harvest may not be visible until evening contemplation. And as you consider the path you walked, you might notice how the suspense that once lingered in uncertainty has softened into perspective, because some answers arrived while others remained beyond immediate reach. Yet neither outcome diminishes the value of persistence, since persistence itself strengthens identity, reinforcing your ability to face tomorrow with deeper resilience. And resilience is perhaps the most valuable companion on any meaningful journey, because it allows aspiration to survive fluctuation, to adapt without surrender, and to learn without resentment. And this capacity mirrors the philosophies shared by reflective leaders and thinkers who emphasize that setbacks and triumphs are not endpoints, but experiences contributing to wisdom. Wisdom that expands only through engagement rather than avoidance. And in recognizing this truth, you understand that motivation is not sustained by excitement alone, but by intentional reflection that reconnects you with purpose at the end of each cycle, because purpose provides continuity when emotions fluctuate, anchoring your direction even when confidence feels uneven. And this anchoring draws you once more toward gratitude, encouraging acknowledgement of lessons gained and opportunities encountered regardless of scale. And gratitude reshapes perception by illuminating value where routine once saw only obligation, turning ordinary experiences into meaningful chapters within your narrative. And narrative matters because humans interpret their lives through stories they construct internally, stories that either empower courage or perpetuate limitation. And by choosing to frame your day as partnership between effort and divine guidance, you craft a narrative rooted in possibility rather than fear, strengthening your readiness for the unknown chapters ahead. And readiness is not defined by perfect preparation, but by willingness to continue evolving, a willingness echoed in the journeys of those who embraced uncertainty as catalyst rather than barrier, including the often discussed example of Jack Ma, whose reflections frequently highlight adaptability and perseverance as companions to vision. Yet again, the significance lies not in replicating another life, but in internalizing the universal principle that conviction paired with humility creates sustainable momentum. And as this principle settles into your awareness, you may begin sensing a quiet confidence replacing earlier tension. Not a loud declaration of certainty, but a calm acceptance that progress unfolds through cycles of effort and surrender, ambition and trust, action and contemplation. And such acceptance deepens your relationship with time itself, encouraging patience without complacency and diligence without anxiety, enabling you to see each day not as isolated performance, but as continuation of a greater unfolding. In this perspective, the evening becomes sacred space for integration, for gathering insight from experience and offering gratitude for guidance received. And through this practice, you reinforce the habit of alignment that began with sunrise, completing a circle that strengthens your spirit and prepares your mind for renewed beginnings. And perhaps as you rest in this awareness, you recognize that success measured solely in outcomes cannot compare to success measured in transformation, because transformation endures beyond circumstance, shaping how you think, decide, and contribute regardless of environment. And it is within this enduring transformation that true motivation resides, not fleeting or dependent on applause, but rooted in identity formed through reflection, discipline, and faith. And as you stand at this closing moment of today's narrative, you hold both memory and anticipation. Memory of effort invested and anticipation of possibilities yet unimagined. And between these two states exists choice. The choice to carry forward lessons learned and to approach tomorrow with renewed clarity, renewed humility, and renewed commitment to begin again with intention. And so you prepare not merely to rest, but to renew, trusting that every conclusion is also preparation for another beginning, and that the alignment you practice today will echo into future mornings, guiding your thoughts before noise returns, steadying your purpose before demands arise, and reminding you that motivation sustained through faith and reflection is not temporary inspiration, but lifelong cultivation, shaping a character capable of facing complexity with grace and ambition, with wisdom. And as this message reaches its close, the invitation remains simple yet meaningful: to continue embracing each sunrise as opportunity to align, each challenge as opportunity to grow, and each evening as opportunity. Knitted to reflect, allowing this rhythm to define not only your productivity, but your perspective. And in doing so, you transform ordinary days into purposeful journeys, guided by intention, resilience, and gratitude. And if you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.